Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Code and Pixels podcast. My name is Kelly, and I'm once again joined by my amazing co-host, Adekunle. Today, we'll be chatting with Dominic about Storybook and Chromatic.
Thanks, Kelly. Dominic is a founder of Chromatic. Hey, Dominic. Thanks for being on the show. How are things going?
Hey, what's up? Hi, all. My name's Dominic. I'm the co-founder of Chromatic, the company behind Storybook. We've been doing a lot of open source work for the past several years. I'm really excited to be here, talk to you about what we're up to, what our past looks like, and what our future looks like. And Before the call, I was just really excited to meet Kelly for the first time, who I've seen on the internet and as a fantastic inspirational presence. And I know Adekunle from here in New York City.
Sounds good. So let's kind of jump into it. So first question is, can you tell us about your career journey and how you ended up founding Chromatic?
Yeah. My background is in product design. That's where I started after graduating from Berkeley. I was in the right place at the right time in the Bay Area, circa like 2010s. That was a fantastic kind of experience for seeing Web 2.0 blossom, seeing the advent of and professionalization of a bunch of design roles, and as well as a bunch of development roles. While in the Bay Area, worked at a bunch of startups. I ended up at Meteor, which is one of the first full stack JavaScript frameworks, and it was an open source based business model. From there, we evolved into Apollo GraphQL, and I was there to see that from basically zero, design the logo for it. We had no product. We grew it and launched it into what it is today. Obviously, I can only play one small part in that. And then at Apollo and at Meteor, one of the things that I learned and was really passionate about, especially as a designer, is building incredible user experiences. And the medium has such a huge impact on the ability to craft those experiences that you can't ignore it. And so I found my passion there in building some of the tools that enable people to build incredible things, incredible front end specifically. And that's where Storybook comes into the picture. So Storybook is the open source project that enables people to build UIs in a component-driven way, build components in isolation, express every single state of those components, loading errors like the really fiddly ones that make the difference, make a profound kind of difference between good UI and really great UI. And that brings me to today. So Storybook happened at the same time Chromatic was spun up because having come from two open source companies previously, Meteor and Apollo, respectively, what we realized is, golly, like you actually need to have a business model around something if you want it to sustain over a long period of time and have the impact on the ecosystem and really help people. So that's where we're at now. Chromatic is the company behind Storybook, and it sells testing services and front end infrastructure services.
Super interesting that you come from open source and that's evolved into what you're building today. I love that story. So when I first joined into it, there were different solutions across different teams and how they were building out component documentation. And I was going, oh, this is so hard to relearn what everyone is doing. And it's kind of inconsistent and how you modify the components and how it works. And at the time, this was over 7 years ago, I had just learned about Storybook and I really loved it because it had everything standardized. There was great documentation on how it worked. And I just loved how you could just start it and there was very minimal setup involved. And so I actually became one of the first Storybook advocates at the company. And I would go around
Yeah.
doing a little like showcase demos, like, look at Storybook, look what it can do. And so we started with the consumer group design system team, and then it grew across all of our design system repos across the company. So it was great to see. And I just want to say thank you so much for making a great product. I'm still a huge Storybook advocate. Always love reading all the release notes and hyping people up. I love that you guys think through different workflows. Like companies, they might build out their stories differently, or they might have their own custom workflow. I'm just curious, like how do you guys find out about those workflows? Like, do you look at other like open source repos? I'm just curious to see like how you factor in all these custom ways that people are using Storybook.
Yeah, that's a really great question. So the first part of the answer is because you work in open source, people are not hesitant to roast you when they don't like a thing. And that is, and in getting that feedback, so too do you get an understanding of what the user's actual intent is. And so that was like, such a cool part of like open source, and it happened at 3 companies in a row now. And it's like fantastic to have almost no filter on user feedback. So that's one way we kind of understand and learn about emerging workflows. The other way is also related to open source. People just going to build the workflow that they want themselves. And in many ways, like what we are in the business of doing is providing people primitives that allow them to fundamentally build whatever they want. Storybook is itself, if you zoom out, is a tool that helps you build UI, whatever UI that you're passionate about. But even if you double click into any of the features in Storybook, there's like people you can use either the development side of it or the documentation side of it or the testing side of it and hook it into their tool chain and however they want. So for instance, for documentation, well, you might have developer only docs in Storybook and then connect that to a broader design system static site. And we want to enable that workflow. And we're not necessarily in the business of trying to do everything for everyone all at once. Same thing with testing. Like with testing, we just launched in the past 2 months new component testing features, which I'm personally excited about. And they integrate with the broader ecosystem so that when you build your CI pipeline or design your CI pipeline, you can use our testing features however best fits your workflow.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like in some cases, tools sometimes get opinionated about like how you do things, and I think that's the one thing I like about Storybook is like, hey, you might do it one way, another company might do another way, but it has to fit the process of your team and your organization. So that's the one thing I love about it. My experience with Storybook was kind of funny. I remember when I first heard about it, I looked at it and I was like, this seems like it's very dev heavy, and I attempted to build my own.
Oh, everyone attempts to build their own. Everyone
And
does. Like, that's
I
the
failed.
hero's journey.
No, but that's the thing. I was like, you know what? I could do it better. Let me see if I could do it better. I spent like a month and I was like, you know what? Never mind. And I was also working in an organization where I was like the only like design technologist. So I was like, if it was between building components and building my own storybook, that's not going to win at all. So it was kind of a case where I was like, all right, this was not the experience. And I didn't use Storybook when I used something else. I forgot what it was. I went to MailChimp, and then it was more of like, and if people don't know, MailChimp had probably like the oldest design system
Yeah.
out there. And they had a really good ecosystem for Storybook where they made it a case where Storybook was literally the foundation of like how we document, but also we use the stories to stop our testing. We also had a doc site. All the examples came from Storybook, and I was like, oh, okay, I could see the power with it. So I think that was kind of the case where I kind of see the greatness around Storybook, especially when, hey, I want to prototype a component. I could like deploy it, and then the designers can kind of do some QA tests and see like, hey, we need change here and there and whatnot. Um, and I think the one thing I would say I always get requests from is like, hey, can we like improve the Storybook UI? And I always have questions. I was like, why? Because I think people always like, we got to design everything. So it's kind of the case where, and I'm wondering like if you have any thoughts on that. But I do want to shift to the idea of like AI because AI is everywhere. AI is on our phones. It's on our fridge. Sooner or later, it's going to be, in our couches. But I'm just wondering, like, where do you see that fitting into the whole like component driven development? And how does Chromatic fit into the picture of like maybe being like an AI first company around, component development overall?
Yeah, for sure. Look, we can do a whole podcast about AI and where we fit into the AI picture. Let me answer your first question first. So, we get a lot of requests for theming and customization. And we do support theming, we do support customization to an extent. And the thing that organizations really have to contend with is, where do they actually get the value? Do they get it from the components being distributed and being built, and the durability of the creative work, or do they get it from the interface of Storybook itself? And I think for us, yes, we want to give people a lot of customization options, but we have to draw a line somewhere, because ultimately you're either going to eject to a static site if you want like full on control of documentation, or you're going to continue using Storybook and maybe not care about that because you derive value of your design system, of your engineering capability from the things that you build and not the things that you customize. So it kind of depends on where people see themselves. Now, to answer your second question around AI and where do we see ourselves fitting into the AI landscape, the TLDRs, like, I think we have a really great fit. And let me tell you a little bit why. Um, so the whole idea around component-driven development, why components became a secular trend, is obvious in retrospect when you think about it, right? Like, components are just standardized parts. Like, they're literally called components in the automotive industry. They're literally like, and you can go back in history to look at all the other times when components were the idea of components or standardized parts were a thing. Microservices, really, that's like components for a different type of engineer, right? And it's you have a fixed input and it returns a fixed output. You don't necessarily need to know what's inside in order to understand that, like, hey, if I can chain a bunch of these microservices together, I can get something really cool out of it. So, in many ways, like, components in the front end were just an extension of a trend that's already been happening for hundreds of years, right? And even more recently, inside of engineering, that was a trend in backend, and then in DevOps, and then and then finally arriving at front end, right? Um, so, like, we've established that components are like our long-standing thing. To get them to uh, like, what I see them as is uh, an accelerant to helping people build and assemble UIs. And so now let's talk about AI. What is AI if not an accelerant to helping people build and assemble UIs? And the thing is, the component construct is actually fantastic for that, because uh, it just like it allows humans to assemble UIs as if they were Legos, so too does like an LLM. Understanding your patterns, like, that they can also assemble UIs as if they were Legos. So AOs are and component-driven development go together really well, and it only takes looking at the kind of current cohort of cool product building tools to see that they're all fundamentally component-driven. Think about the Bolt.news, V0s, Lovables. Guess what they're building under the hood? They're building and assembling a bunch of components that a foundational model trained on. Um, and so that's one of the reasons why they can deliver such a great output. Um, okay, so that's a little bit about the construction of it, and I just want to stop there because I could probably go on. I could talk about where Chromatic kind of fits into this. Um, so maybe that's a nice segue. So in a world where AI accelerates your like your organization or your individual ability to build things, so too does the burden kind of shift onto you reviewing and maintaining those things. Now, think about your time, Kelly, at Intuit, right? You're working on a design system. The design system's successful. It's spreading. It's amazing. Now, all of the front end engineers have the ability to build things maybe twice as fast, right? Well, like, has your review team, has like your designer, your PM, you as a front end engineer, has that scaled twice as much from a headcount perspective, such that you could kind of interpret like all the things that are getting built and like actually understand, oh, like, this thing that we built really quickly, like, does that actually fit um, our design intent, our development intent? And so that's kind of an example of like what I see going on in the broader space of, yeah, we figured out how to generate a bunch of things really quickly. And component driven development absolutely helps you do that, even without AI. Now, the bottleneck ends up being quality, right? Like, and like stakeholder sign off and like alignment. And quality is something that you can solve with technology. Alignment is something you can accelerate with technology, but perhaps not solve. So in Chromatic, what we're looking at is like we're a testing tool, right? And but that's really it pairs really well with like this age of like hyper um, hyper productivity around building UIs, because as a testing tool, you want to understand it's like a a way for you to understand that the thing that you're creating is quality, and ensure that the thing you're creating is quality and across like all the dimensions that matter to you. So that's theming, that's viewports, that's accessibility, that's the visual aspect, the functional aspect. Like, who the hell has time to do that? Even AI can't do all of that like, automatically. You actually do need specialized like testing tools. And at the same time, there's like a reviewing aspect too. If you look at AI startups like CodeRabbit, you look at GitHub Copilot integrated into pull requests, you look at Graphite.dev. All of these folks are kind of solving pretty similar, or rather, these products are solving similar challenges around. Hey, we have a lot of things now that we need, that we have greater throughput on the creativity side, but we have fixed throughput on the review and sign off and maintenance side of things, and that's kind of where Chromatic fits in, at least for the front end, or really specifically for the front end. It's testing, and then it's like the review with stakeholders.
Wow, that's a lot to take in. I love your take on components as Legos and how all these companies are building out these quick experiences faster than ever before because they have this good foundation. And you can compare 50 buttons across different design systems to see what they do really fast now instead of having to like manually scrutinize and understand. So I love that AI is taking out all that manual kind of investigation, and now you can get like this really quick summary and all these props and whatnot. I think one of my favorite parts about our workflow is how we integrate a storybook as part of our CI/CD, our continuous integration deployment strategy. So each canary build in a PR generates its own storybook URL, which has made it so easy for us to use that for PR reviews. We use that for designers to actually be able to click around and make sure that things are working as they expected. It's one of my favorite workflows just to have that be automatically built in. And so I wanted to get your thoughts on like where do you see automation and deployments evolving, and do you have anything in the pipeline for tooling around that?
Yeah, that's one of the killer use cases of Storybook. What you just described, like the ability to align different stakeholders, get people to talk about the same artifact, like um, that is actually going to go get shipped to production, right? Like, yeah, people can talk about pictures in Figma, but they're not like they are fundamentally pictures, right? Like, whereas like when you bring something into Storybook and you build it out, that has the intention to get delivered to customers. So that's when you really want to bring the designers, the PMs, and whoever else into the picture. So yeah, that's a fundamental workflow for us, where we're uh, what we've just launched around testing is a critical piece for ins- uh, for the workflow that you just described. And let me tell you why. Uh, the quality of what gets produced um, is such a huge factor in whether or not it's shippable. And so there are a bunch of different dimensions for quality, right? There are subjective dimensions, which is something that you just described, Kelly, around, hey, let's get designers in to look at a thing and say, like, yeah, that looks right, great. But then there's like, as a front end developer, you're actually measured by a bunch of different other dimensions of quality, right? Other engineers are measured by security. I mean, there's security, there's performance, there's accessibility, um, and in addition to like the actual code itself, right? Like inside of like a code review. And so what we just launched is new testing capabilities built directly into Storybook, into the development environment, so that we we can show the output of tests immediately and instantaneously as you're doing development with Storybook, right? And that does kind of does a couple of things that I think are really virtuous. The first is like exposing that uh, tests exist and that they are a key part of like understanding it, like of your output as a front end developer. The second thing is more obvious. It's just a way quicker feedback loop around like you pressing save, you running, and like it, we can run your test for you and give you the results directly, like inside of the UI that you're currently looking at, and that uh, elevates this idea of like uh, mm, objective quality um, uh, to new level, and it helps teams ship better things. So yeah, that's what I'm excited about. That's what we're launching in the next, or like that we just launched and we're continuing to improve. It's like Storybook testing. It's called Storybook Test and has a suite of different dimensions that you can test in, including functional tests, accessibility tests, and visual tests built directly into Storybook.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. It's actually a segue to my next question. So I remember you had like a, was it a release meetup in New York a couple months back, and you were
Yeah,
talking about,
yeah. I
yeah,
demoed this workflow and then we polished it up even more and then shipped it recently.
no, and that was a good thing because one of the things you talk to different people that do component development, everyone has a different way of doing testing. And I'm just wondering, what are the advantages of having the built-in tests into Storybook versus like, because how I've done in the past where it's like I kind of use more of the behavior-driven development where I'm like, all right, these are the test cases, and then I try to write them for each of them. And I see the pros with having it built in.
Yeah, in many ways, what we try to do at Storybook is look at the best practices from across the ecosystem and then integrate them directly into Storybook so that you don't have to glue all that stuff yourself. So let me give you an example. There's a best practice for creating accessibility pipelines that has you run it in CI, have like Axe core, run in CI, and then like report stuff back to you, right? Now that's fine, right? People have like invented that, and what who are we to say like, oh, we're doing it differently? Um, no, we're saying that is amazing. Let's fully integrate it into the Storybook experience, along with two other types of tests, so that you run one command, Storybook test, and you can output and simultaneously like get feedback on multiple dimensions without having to glue it all together yourself. Again, this is like the difference between um, and the archetype of person that wants to DIY everything and you set up their own different tool chains for a lot of for their work, and the type of person that wants to get it all out of the box so that they can focus on the things that they care about from an engineering perspective, like building features or building components for their design system. So that's kind of like the broader picture of like how we approach integration, and we want to be the ergonomic layer for developers, like while still providing like the best possible underlying tooling. So what we just launched, for instance, we partnered with VTest, the fastest test runner available right now, and it's the successor to Jest. We to offer component testing directly and bake it directly inside of Storybook. Now, you could run an entire V-test pipeline. That's fine too. And in fact, we've enabled you to do that without even running Storybook. But at the same time, like we can also enrich your experience by providing these other two types of tests that may or may not run with V-test, while like preserving just one way for a developer to learn and understand how to to like execute the tests.
I remember going through our pipeline and noticing we had a long stage for one of our testing stages. It was like a a 50-minute test. And I went, there's got to be a better way. So we were looking and we saw a Storybook test runner. I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
like, let's try this out. Like, we got a 50-minute baseline mark here. How fast is this going to be? It went from 50 minutes to 2 minutes. And this was not even the latest. This was like when the test runner first came out. It's like gotten so much faster since then. And I remember the most heartbreaking thing we found out was that we couldn't upgrade to Storybook, that version that had it. I also just wanted to say like that it's been great for our team to see those differences.
Yeah.
But you talked about my experience with the consumer group design system, and I want to give a shout out to Andrew Lazowski, who's a former teammate who wrote a lot of Storybook plugins. I learned a lot about plugins from all his open source work. Do you have any favorite plugins? Like, what's your thought on Storybook plugins and what excites you about that space?
Oh, the add-on ecosystem for Storybook is really incredible. I love it because again, it's satisfying the workflow that we as a maintenance team can't take on ourselves, right? So, a couple add-ons that I think are pretty cool. There's one that is a test code generator, and it's completely GUI based. So you just click around, and it creates a Storybook test like for you, and you can save it directly into your file system or copy and paste it. Um, so it's by a fellow named Igor, I believe. There's a new one that I've been talking to the maintainer of called Story UI, and that integrates Storybook and the things that you build in your design system into an LLM based interface and allows you to prompt and generate stories based on the things that are already in your design system, and that's like kind of appropriate to the timing and of now too, because what a lot of people are trying to figure out in the design system space is how to use their design system in an AI powered workflow, and how to improve the actual output of the AI by supplying it context on what the things like actually are supposed to do and how they're actually supposed to function. And so this add-on is called Story UI. I don't know if it's like fully out yet on the Storybook like add-on catalog, but it's out. Like Google it or chat. No, you can't chat GPT it. You know,
I was about to say that. I was like, you could just ask ChatGPT and it might give us what we need. But
it's so new.
uh,
I haven't trained on it yet.
no, but that I feel like that's useful because like anytime I'm building a new component, it's usually the same thing. It's like design spec, API, all this stuff, and then the thing I hate most is like writing documentation and writing test case. So if I could like figure out
Yeah,
how to do that very quickly without even thinking about it, that'd be awesome. Um,
yeah. At a
but
time like str- the LLMs are trained on CSS or on component story format, which makes it, and there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of examples that are publicly out there. So Claude and ChatGPT are fantastic at writing stories. Like it's mind blowing how good they are at like expressing states of your UI based on something as flexible as a TypeScript file.
oh yeah, and I think it's I've used it recently because like I was kind of hesitant, but then I saw like how it was detailed with like the props names and like the descriptions and all the other stuff, and I was like, oh wow, I'm gonna use this all the time. And it's also helpful for folks that are new to design systems because I think that's one thing folks struggle with is around like thinking about the edge cases and like what's the happy path and like what's the unhappy path, and I think it helps with that stuff. So um,
You know what? Uh, it's fascinating, like how people are going to new folks are going to use AI with design systems, and that like we spent the last 7 years as an industry working on like perfecting documentation for humans, right? Like, oh, here's how you use it, here's how you don't use it, and like pros around it, delivering these like kind of really fancy static doc site, and then AI comes in the door and says like, "Look, I don't need to go to your doc site, or I don't need all the fancy stuff. I need things that fit into a context window, and so that I can generate a bunch of stuff." like automatically from a design system. So it kind of changes where the focus is, I think, um, from kind of having the perfect thing for humans to maybe kind of augmenting that with the perfect thing for AI, like LLMs. And we don't know what that looks like yet.
Yeah, it's something that we'll have to wait and see. Um, yeah, so my last question is around like just like general storybook. So I'm wondering like was there any big challenge you face while building like storybook that you didn't see any solution, but you were able to overcome it somehow?
That's a really good question. I think there's a lot of like eras of overcoming pretty difficult challenges. I think that maybe the foundational difficult challenge, um, and this is kind of true for a lot of open source projects, is maintaining something over a long time as the JavaScript ecosystem continues to innovate is really, really hard. Um, and people kind of underestimate that when they start an open source project because think about it, right? Like how many versions of React have been released that have broken or changed their API that a tool, an open source tool like Storybook has to support, and then multiply that by Angular, Vue, and then Svelte now, um, React, and so on. And that's like, then multiply that by the builders like Webpack and Vite and Bun, God, RSPack, and all of this has to be maintained in lockstep. So, like, one of the biggest challenges that we face is like figuring out a business model and figuring out a maintenance model and product scope that can support our contributions to the ecosystem without kind of burning us all out. So that's maybe one. Uh, um,
Oh no, I've been there before, like where it's like dependency hell, where it's like I want to use this thing, but then I have to update this thing, and then you have to update another thing, and it's like okay, and it a week project ends up being
oh
a
yeah,
whole quarter. So
Adequately, you probably face this in that month where you're trying to build the storybook. You're doing it for React, and then you had to do it for all the other things that you had to support. Now imagine that for months and months and months and years and years and years of changes. Like you would never get a chance to work on the things that you wanted to work on because you'd spend all the time on maintaining the thing. And I think that has ended up becoming a superpower too. Like it's a kind of a tricky problem, but once you address it, like Storybook now works with the most popular tools in the ecosystem. And for our users and our customers, that's fantastic because they learn one API and then that is incredibly portable to their next project or their next company or their next thing.
yeah, for sure. Cool. So closing question: do you have anything to plug, or do you want to shout out anyone or anything?
I have a lot of things to plug, but for the folks that are listening that use Storybook and want to take that to the next level, consider checking out Chromatic. It's at chromatic.com. We're the company behind Storybook. We provide a lot of the automated testing infrastructure. So if you want to run your tests like very, very fast in parallel, check us out across visual testing, accessibility testing, and functional testing. That's the main thing from a business standpoint. And then from an open source standpoint, if you haven't checked out Storybook 9 yet, now's a great time. It comes with a bunch of testing tools built directly into Storybook to give you feedback as you press save.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on today's episode, Dom. This has been great. I learned a lot about your journey, about Chromatic, about Storybook. This has been so much fun. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks y'all for having me on. Really, it was a blast to be here.
Yeah, thank you.
We want to thank you for tuning into this episode. For more content, feel free to explore our previous episodes on codeandpixels.fm. And don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter for updates on upcoming episodes. Also, feel free to connect with us on social media at Code and Pixels FM. Y'all have a great day.